LA, right?
Yeah, I live in LA. Yeah,
Oh, nice. Okay, awesome. Okay, we can get started.
let's do
Hi,
it.
besties. It's Amir Yas. Welcome back to the Vault Podcast. You're here with my girl Monica and Maz Jobrani, comedian, actor. You know, someone that I looked up to, someone that wanted me to get into entertainment. Like you are really an inspiration to a lot of Persian Americans out here. So we appreciate you.
I
Thanks for being
appreciate
here.
you. Thank you for having me on, and thank you for being in a career that's not doctor, lawyer, or engineer.
Thank you for saying that. We have enough of those. We have enough of those.
Uh-huh.
That's funny.
That's wonderful. So, Iranian American comedian, you've been able to turn cultural misunderstandings into comedy gold. What inspired you to even take this career route?
Amir will tell you when you come with from a background of immigrant parents, they want you to be lawyer, doctor, engineer. They want you to be, because we left Iran at the revolution. My parents come here. They don't even know what the concept of a comedian is. And and as a young kid growing up in America, I'm watching TV and I discover Eddie Murphy and I go, oh, I want to be like that guy. And of course, for me, that's what I wanted. But my parents were like, "Are you crazy?" And I started doing musical theater in my junior high school. We had some plays, and I would do it. And the director would tell my parents, "Your kid has what it takes. He's got that thing, because I love being on stage." And my parents would say, "Oh, that's great." And then we get in the car, and my dad would be like, "That bitch is crazy. Don't listen to her. You're going to be a doctor or a lawyer." So there was a lot of negotiating that I had to do with my parents, with myself. And I went to grad school to become a professor, and then I dropped out of that. And eventually, in my mid 20s, I had continued to do acting as a hobby. And in my mid 20s, I was working at an advertising agency, and there was a gentleman there. His name was Joe Rhine, and Joe was in his 60s. And Joe saw me doing this comedy I was in, and he goes, "You're funny. Have you ever thought about doing this?" And I said, "Joe, I've been wanting to act and do comedy for all my life. I'm going to try and save up some money, and maybe when I'm in my 30s, I'll go for it." And he goes, "Listen," he goes, "I'm in my 60s now, and there were some things I wanted to do in my 20s. I just kept putting it off, and I never got to it. So he goes, if you really got to do it, you should do it." And I was 26 at the time, and that was my light bulb moment. And I decided I'm going to start taking improv acting classes. From there, I started taking stand up comedy classes. And this was 26, 27 years ago.
Wow.
And I haven't turned back since.
I love that. Professor Maz, that has a nice ring to it.
Yeah, well, the irony is I dropped out of grad school. I was
Yeah.
gonna get my PhD in political science. I dropped out, but I've now had a chance to, give two commencement speeches at Cal, where I went to school. I've gotten a chance to perform in universities, like the top universities around the world. I've had a chance to perform in and even speak at, almost like as if I got my professorial privilege without having to get the PhD.
That's amazing. And also, it's funny that you studied political science and then, obviously with the Axis of Evil comedy tour, and there's a lot of, politics that you kind of towed that line. So, did you always want to kind of push the envelope a bit? I mean, comedy is a great tool to do that, but is that something that you ever worried about, like blowback or, Hollywood? Like, I worked as a publicist for 20 years and I saw how conservative they can be with any kind of political opinions and you get blacklisted. Were you ever worried about that?
I never even thought of it. Like it's in my bones. It's like I feel like these are the things I need to say. And the truth is, my favorite comics are the ones who are making a statement. So whether it's George Carlin or Richard Pryor or now like Colbert and Jon Stewart and John Oliver, I like comedians who can show the hypocrisy and make you laugh, but also you're learning something. So I would love to emulate those people. And so it's what's in my wheelhouse. When people say, "Oh, don't talk about politics, keep politics out of it," I go, I'm trying not to talk about politics, but that's just the thing that keeps coming into my head. That's the thing that bothers me. That's the thing, when I see the hypocrisy out there, or I see mistreatment of certain people, I see the cruelty towards immigrants, I see the stupid tariffs, I see things like that. I go, I can't help myself. I got to make fun of it. And I'm trying right now to be a little not, I try not to be too angry about it. I try to make it fun and funny so that hopefully, even if you're a supporter of some of these things, you see the comedy. But a lot of times, unfortunately, those folks don't see the comedy and they just take offense like you've insulted their grandmother.
Yikes, I know. It can be kind of scary going there, but I mean, it's what resonates now with the majority of people, right?
Mhm.
Everyone, it's become so polarizing. Can't run from it. It's all over TikTok. It's all over the news. So, I mean, if it's resonating with the people, I can see how you would want to use it in a comedic way. And I love that about you. What are some of the biggest misconceptions Americans still have about Iranians?
I mean, I think I don't blame Americans for not knowing about Iran as much as Iranians do, or any country, because America is its own country. It's got its own problems, and people that are running around all day trying to pay the bills don't have time to think about the the inner workings of Iran. And so I think that probably if you ask an average American what's the deal with Iran, they say, "Oh, those guys are the bad guys. They're the terrorists. They're the mullahs, all that stuff." But a lot of Iranian Americans will tell you, and we know because of our community, that there's a lot of good Iranians doing great things, like anywhere. And so it's actually the opposite, which is I think sometimes Iranians have an expectation on Americans to say, you should know more about what's going on in our country. And I just remind them, I go, nobody in America cares about what's going on in Iran. I mean, some people do, obviously, but the general population of Americans don't care about what's going on in Iran or Syria or Guatemala or anywhere, Russia. They don't care. They're like in their own world. And so for us to expect them to think about us is takes the burden off of us and makes it blames them. Whereas I'm saying, no, we need to stay on top of it and keep talking about these issues, and hopefully the people of Iran can eventually find freedom from the current autocratic state that they live in.
Absolutely. And even saying Islamic Republic is kind of like it's an oxymoron because Republic is freedom and then you're forcing, because I identify as Muslim, but I don't feel like it should be forced on anyone. It
Yeah.
should be a choice to wear hijab. It should be a point of pride. Like you should be able to do what feels right to you. Do you feel like sometimes it gets annoying? Because I remember sometimes being the only Persian in the room, and yes, I say Persian. I know people say Iranian, but I like Persian. But I was the only Persian in the room, and a lot of times I felt like I was having to kind of be like CNN and kind of educate everyone. Does that ever feel tiring sometimes, or do you feel like no, it's good to be able to kind of correct people and set them on the right way?
Well, I've done jokes about that. I've done jokes about how like people think that I know what's going on, so they'll say like, "What's up with the gas prices?" And I like as if I'm supposed to know. The truth is, a lot of people that come from countries that had turmoil do know a lot about the history of their country, at least a lot
Right.
more than Americans do. So whether you're talking to an Afghan or you're talking to a Syrian, you're talking to a Ukrainian, whatever, they're going to teach you a lot more than you would ever imagine you would know. So I know that I know more about Iran and its history than your average American. So I constantly find myself educating people in certain ways. Yeah, it's, at a certain point, you do like in the joke. I say, I just wish I were Swedish, because then there hasn't been a war in I don't know how long. Like there's nothing. What are they going to talk about? There's not much to talk about. So sometimes you want to break from it. Yeah.
Mhm, mhm. Speaking of a break, has there ever been a joke that you thought was hilarious? You thought that, okay, I'm going to own the room, but it totally bombed.
Yeah, that happens a lot. I think you come up with ideas where you go, "Oh, this is really funny," and you try it out, and it doesn't get the laughs. And then you try it a few more times. You try it in another club. You try to tweak it, see if you can make it work. And then there's times where you go, "You know what? That joke's just not going to work. Let me get rid of it. I'm going to throw it away."
Mhm.
Or you keep it on your phone in the notes page somewhere down the line, and then one day you're just going through. You go, "Oh my God, I should do something with this." And so um, quite often we think something's going to be funny, but it's not. A lot of it is, by the way, if you watch comedians, a lot of it is the audience has fun if the comedian is having fun.
Yep.
So if a comedian really loves a joke, an audience will come on board, if for no other reason, just to humor the comedian. No pun intended. So So yeah, I mean, it happens a lot.
That makes sense. Well, I'm nowhere near your level of comedic genius, but I've done stand up and I've done some shows and stuff. And I remember the best piece of advice I got is that the audience doesn't know where your joke is going. So even if you mess it up, they're not going to know. So what's the best piece of advice that you've gotten from a fellow comedian, or maybe when you were coming up? I mean, I'm sure you're the one giving the advice now, but if there was
You
something that.
know, the first of all, when I first took that stand-up comedy class, they taught us. They said, get on stage as much as you can and write as much as you can. So those
Mhm.
two, okay, that's something I tell everybody, and that's why, supposedly somebody asked Chris Rock, like, what's your advice? He said, move to LA or New York because you need stage time. You got to get up on stage, and those cities have a lot of clubs. Um, the other thing I would say is there was a guy named Freddie Soto who has since passed away, but he was a really funny guy, and he was a regular at the Comedy Store when I was first starting out. And I was doing a show one time, and he was in the back of the room. I was the last performer of the night, so it must have been like 1:30 or 1:45 in the morning, and there was these two nerdy guys with this really good-looking girl in the audience. And I started doing my act. So they were the only audience. I started doing my act, and then at one point, it just wasn't going anywhere because I'm doing an act that you would do to a full room. I'm doing it for three people. So finally, I was like, you know what? I go, what's going on here? How did you two end up with her? What's the story here? And then they started having fun with me, and I started having fun with them, and it ended up being a fun 15 minutes. And when I came off stage, Freddie Soto was nice enough to go, hey, you're funny. I go, thanks. He goes, no, it's not about the jokes. It's not about the bits. You're either funny or you're not. And he goes, you right now went up on stage and you were starting to do your bits, but you realized that it's not working because it's just not the right setting. And you just turned this situation into a funny situation. So I guess kind of in line with what you said about the audience doesn't know, in your mind, sometimes you're like, okay, these are the jokes. I have to do these jokes. This is what I'm going to do. But if the audience isn't laughing, you need to adjust and go, let me talk to them. Let me make this fun. They don't know what my act was. And, sometimes you have a better act just doing crowd work.
Yeah.
So be loose, be free, and be funny.
I love that. That's really, really good advice. How do you feel just on that topic of like crowd work? How do you feel about some of these TikTokers and Instagram people that are now kind of going from reality TV or TikTok and they're doing comedy? Do you feel like the more the merrier, or do you feel like sometimes they don't take it so seriously? They're just like, I can do stand up. Like,
Well, it shows pretty quickly because you can be funny in a social media post because it's all controlled. You've written it, you edit it, you come up with funny sounds, a lot of stuff. Live comedy has its own rhythms. It's got its own it's got its own uh, energy, and so you see a lot of people. And this was before TikTok. You had famous actors whose acting career had been on the decline, and they would say, "Oh, let me go try and do stand-up comedy." And it was interesting because you'd be at the club, and they'd say, "Oh, come to the stage right now, such and such movie star," and the audience is like, "Oh my god!" And then the guy would go up, and he'd have like 2 minutes where he's funny because he's just like they love him. They'll give him a little bit of leeway, but then after 2 minutes, you'd be like, oh my God, he's got no material. He's got no rhythm. He's got a lot of work to do. So ultimately, for these TikTokers or whoever else is trying to do stand up comedy, you can't cheat with stand up comedy. You have to put in the time. Very rarely do you see someone who's like 2 years in and just owning the stage. Eddie Murphy was an exception. He was young. Dave Chappelle was young when they hit. But for the most part, it takes time. So even those guys, I go for it, but just know it's 5-10 times a week on stage, and you do it for 5 to 10 years, and then eventually you'll get good on stage.
That's a long time. Goodness gracious. Being a comedian dad, how do your kids react to your stand up? Do they think you're funny?
My kids, when they were younger, they would come to the shows, they would travel with me sometimes,
Oh,
and they
nice.
loved it, and they loved being in the world of comedy. Like, I took them to the Montreal Comedy Festival a couple of times, so they got to meet all these big comedians and find their favorites. Matter of fact, I remember one time coming home, and I think they were watching like a Joe Coy special on Netflix, and I was like, "Oh my God, you're cheating on me! You guys are watching someone else." But I love it. I love the fact that my kids like comedy. My daughter's a very good comedy writer, My son is also, he's got the presence. If he wanted to do it, he could do it, but they don't necessarily want to go down that path. And now, obviously they're teenagers, so, some eye rolling and stuff. My son actually has my favorite laugh. Like when he laughs at my jokes, because sometimes like my daughter will roll her eyes. My wife will say, "Oh, that's dumb," but my son will laugh, and I'm like, "Oh, that's all I need."
That's very sweet. I love that. So speaking of like, laughs, and a lot of times with the comedians, when you start out, you're almost like having to earn the laugh from the audience. What is that phenomenon where people don't want to laugh? Like they don't want to give you the laugh. Like I know when I was doing, some open mics early on, it's like I know it was funny and I know you wanted to laugh, and then later they'd be like, "Oh, that was funny," but they wouldn't give me the laugh. It's like I didn't deserve it. What is that about?
That's never happened to me. No, I think, here's my advice to that. I've done shows before where the room is having a good time, but I see one person just staring at me. And I keep doing jokes, look back, guy's still staring, not laughing. And so there was a time when I would be like, "Hey, is everything okay?" And I realized what that does is it derails, because nobody else sees that guy's face. They're all seeing you. It derails your whole show because you're focusing on the one guy who wasn't laughing. And so now I've just learned to just go through it, because sometimes you'll ask him, "Is everything okay?" Maybe the guy doesn't speak English. Maybe the guy doesn't like you. That's comedy subjective. Maybe the guy is, just, his wife just left him and he's depressed. There's a million reasons. So I don't think people come in and go like, "I'm not going to laugh." Some people, first of all, there's a comedy culture. So the best audiences, I love that. My favorite audiences are like when you go to, like, let's say the Comedy Store or the Laugh Factory on a hot Saturday night. You have comedy fans. They're not the fans of any one particular person. They're comedy fans. They know how to laugh. That's the best kind of audience. There's some people that don't know the culture of comedy. So when I first started doing shows in Europe, we go to Germany, or we go to, like, I think we were in Holland, and they were all kind of like watching me like it's a play. And they were kind of chuckling a little bit, but they were just watching. And then after the show, they were like, "That was the funniest thing I've ever seen in my entire life." Because they didn't have the stand-up comedy culture. They had theater culture. So when you get in your head starting to analyze why is that person doing this? Why is that person that? It's not worth your time. Stick to your thing, do your thing. And by the way, you may do the same set in two places in the same night, and it'll kill in one place and you'll die in the next. Sometimes the room is just set up wrong. Who knows? Maybe coming in, the parking was hard and people are upset, or the waitress. You just don't know. So I've stopped trying to analyze it, and I'll just look past that face. I'm like, all right, I guess not having a good time. I don't know what's going on.
That could be a psyche killer, because I can only imagine you're up there telling your jokes, having a good time. The audience is, everyone's laughing. And then there's this one person that you get laser focus on. But I just want to pivot from that. If you could roast any world leader, anyone, with no consequences, who would it be and why?
If I could roast any world leader, I mean, I think the job of a comedian is to make fun of leaders and make fun of those in power. And that's why, like, Donald Trump is a punching bag for a lot of comedians, because the stuff he says and does, easy to make fun of. Even Biden, as we saw his kind of dementia stuff kicking in, or all that, very easy to make fun of. So, I mean, there's a ton of these guys, and the question becomes, who can take a joke? I would assume somebody like Justin Trudeau, who seems to be pretty secure in himself, can take a joke. But we see, like, Donald Trump has a hard time taking a joke. He gets really upset at the late night talk show hosts. He didn't go to the correspondents' dinner, which was, historically Republican and Democrats would go and get roasted, and he didn't go. So yeah, I mean, just line them up. We can roast all of them. Khamenei, let's roast the supreme leader. I mean,
Yeah,
come on
let's
up.
roast them all. They're irroastable. They make it
Yeah,
easy.
Oh,
They
yeah,
make
yeah.
it
yeah,
easy.
Hmm. A lot of content there,
yeah.
especially with all the stuff that's going on. I was scrolling on TikTok, and after Trump had his fire sale on the White House lawn of the Teslas, So many comedians jumped on that and they started doing skits and all kinds of stuff. What are your thoughts on that? Do you enjoy watching other comedians like that? Are these up and coming comedians? Can their careers pivot from that?
I mean, the world has changed. The career is no longer, oh, I'm going to be a movie
Yeah.
star, but the career is, I'm going to make millions of dollars on TikTok videos. So, yeah, they
Yeah.
don't need Hollywood. They don't need to wait for a script to come in. They just go shoot that stuff, and good for them. I mean, that's fantastic. If you've been able to figure that out, and you're your own production company, you're your own writer, you're your own producer. So I think that's fantastic. I mean, that's great. The challenge for us is trying to break through the noise or break through those other funny uh, videos and have ours be seen and have our growth continue. And you're competing with, like you said, professional TikTokers who've got production teams making videos. You're competing with cute dogs and cats and babies. You're competing with the whole world to try and get people's attention for 5 minutes. So it's that part of it's a bit challenging. It's a little bit of a hamster wheel.
I could see that. Can you demystify the process a little bit of writing jokes? Because like for example, Ellen DeGeneres, I've watched her stand up, and people are like, "Oh, it just looks very like stream of consciousness and conversational." Of course, she's writing these jokes. So, what is like really the process? Because people think you just if you're a lot of times people are like, "Oh, I'm situationally funny. I'm going to do stand up," and then they go and they bomb, right? So, what is the process?
Some people sit down and write for several hours a day and try to come up with jokes. For me, a lot of it has to do with what's on my mind. Sometimes, the longer you do it, the person that's off stage becomes more and more like the person on stage. Your persona becomes the same. And so you'll be at breakfast or lunch or something talking to a friend or your wife. You say something, you go, "Oh, that's kind of funny. That's a funny concept. Let me see if I can turn it into something." Then you take that, for me at least, I take that on stage. When I'm in town in LA, I usually get to the Comedy Store, Laugh Factory, and Improv. Between the three clubs, I'll end up like 5, 6 times on a week getting up, and I will have an idea, and I'll say, "Let me try that joke here. Let me try that joke here. Let me tweak it." I record it on my phone as I go, so that, excuse me, I can listen to it in the car or wherever, and that joke starts to grow and grow and grow, and then you get confident with the joke, and now you're doing the joke really well. And then one night when you're doing it really well, you add another punchline to it, and it just keeps growing. And you just keep doing that until you have, close to an hour, and you take that on the road, and then you film it, and you put it online or you put it on a network, and then you go back to writing more jokes. And so that's why for me, it's very important. A lot of my stuff is about, if it's family stuff, I'm talking about my kids at their current age, um, because that helps. Because if I can't do a joke about my kids being babies because they're no longer babies, and then if it's more current affairs stuff, for me, again, it helps to have some current affairs going. And it's funny because sometimes when things change, like you have a joke that worked under one world order, and then all of a sudden, like for example, Canada's a good example. Like for the longest time, you'd be like, "Oh, Canadian, you're the nice white people. We love you." Now you're like, "Oh, we want to annex you and make you the 51st state. You're booing us now." So all of a sudden, Canada is like a considered. They have an issue with America. So things change. So that's the one danger of doing stuff that's not evergreen, is that it's almost a time capsule. But I think that's good. Like if you look at all my specials, I've been talking about certain things going on at that time. So I think it's a good thing to do that.
Definitely. Definitely is. Definitely is. How has being part of the Axis of Evil tour shaped your career or identity as a comedian?
Well, the Accent Evil Comedy Tour was a tour that was started. Mitzi Shore, who was the owner of the Comedy Store, she was this Jewish lady. She was a guru of comedy. People like Jim Carrey, David Letterman, Richard Pryor, Robin Williams, all these guys all went through the Comedy Store, and it's a legendary place. It continues to be. So she had
Maz,
made me
that's Pauly Shore's mother, right? Is
Pauly
that
Shore's
Pauly
mother.
Shore's?
Yeah, yeah.
Got it. Got
And
it.
she
Okay,
had
got it.
made me a regular at that club in, I think, 1999 or 2000. And then at the time, she was watching the news, and there was an uprising between the Palestinians and the Israelis. And she said, I feel like there's going to be a need for positive voice for Muslims and Middle Easterners in the near future. So she
Wow.
created a show, and she called it the Arabian Nights. And it was me and Ahmed, who's Egyptian, Aaron Cater, who's Palestinian, Sam Tripoli, who's Armenian. We had a bunch of people on our show. And we kept doing the show, but Iranians would come up after the show and be like, Iranians, we are not Arab, we are Persian. I was like, I know. So eventually, me, Ahmed, and Aaron went off and created the Axis of Evil comedy tour, which then ended up on Comedy Central. And it was the first time you saw Dean Obeidallah joined us. He's a fourth guy. So the first time you saw 4 comedians with Middle Eastern backgrounds on an American television program. So it was kind of cool. And then we took that and we toured it in the Middle East, and it was a successful tour. And I think that helped people get to know me, because once the special came out on Comedy Central, and the DVDs came out, people would pass out watch a DVD, give it to their friend. Or I would see, back then, it was before social media had taken off. YouTube is just starting. People would take one of my jokes from YouTube, they'd cut it, and they would put it into their group email, and they would send it to a bunch of people. And I was in some of those group emails. So I saw my clip circulating, and I was like, oh my God, people are discovering me. And that's where I feel like I went, like I'd done a movie called Friday After Next, and the character's name was Moley. So up until then, I think people that knew me would know me as Moley. Once Axis of Evil came, I think people started getting to know me as Maz Jobrani. And we disbanded the group in 2008, and I've been touring solo since.
Wow, amazing. And it's funny because it's like no one ever says Maz. They always say Maz Jobrani. Like, especially the Persians, they're very proud of like both your names. They're like, we got to say both, and like it's just this like level of pride. And I remember myself seeing that and being like, wow, there's like comedians that look like me, look like my family, and they're saying things that I can relate to. And then Americans are finding it funny. So how did you guys bridge the gap with that? And then my second question of that is, how do you make what's happening in Israel and Palestine right now funny? Like, how do you, because people are not touching that joke with a 50-foot pole, but how do you make it funny?
Well, first of all, I think what made us relatable to a wider American audience was we came up in the comedy clubs. We didn't come up in front of, Middle Easterners. We came up in front of just regular comedy crowd. So when you're there, and also, by the way, I grew up in America, so my sense of humor is probably American as well. And so we just did our thing, and then the audience found us. It wasn't like, you can't reverse engineer and be like, oh, I'm going to do jokes that this audience will like. A lot of times when people perform with me and they're newer, they'll be like, oh, I should do jokes about Persians. I go, listen, this audience is mixed. There's Persian, there's white, there's Arab, there's all kinds. So if you decide to do a joke about your Persian background, just make sure you do it in a way so that they can all relate. And that's why I stopped necessarily only saying Persian this, Persian that, but saying immigrant this, immigrant that. Because a lot of immigrants, whether you're Indian or Chinese or Russian or whatever, we have a lot in common. The Israel-Palestine issue is very tough because people are so sensitive about it. I personally had posted a couple things like, ceasefire, and my heart goes out to the victims of October 7th, as well as the victims in Gaza. And you would always get pushback from people going like, "Oh, it was their fault. It was their fault. How dare you say this, or how dare you say that?" And so, at a certain point, you're like, "Oh my God!" I remember this. This actually, this was interesting to me because at one point, when Netanyahu was continuously bombing Gaza, I remember Chuck Schumer, who's a big proponent and a big supporter of Israel. He gave some speech, and he was like, Netanyahu and Israel needs to stop this. And he kind of was basically, he was saying it needs to be stopped. And the next day they just kept bombing. And the next day America just kept sending weapons. And so I was like, if the senator, the majority senator at the time, it was the majority, makes a speech and it makes no difference, what's my post on Instagram going to do to make a difference? So I found ways of, again, trying to express my opinion. It's hard to make it funny. As a matter of fact, I was at a show and some lady who was, came to the show. She goes, why don't you do any jokes about what Israel's doing and all that? I said, listen, I don't find it funny because it's like there's people dying. It's really hard. And so the only thing I try to do is use my social media from time to time to spread videos and other things that we see that feel like there's injustice being done. Like, for example, these arrests of the protesters who were
Hmm.
protesting the Gaza war, and
Right.
now they're being
Not
arrested
right.
by ICE. Yeah, it's like that. That's a slippery slope down into fascism, and we're seeing
Yes.
it. As a matter of fact, the arrest of that one Turkish student at Tufts, the video
Hmm.
of the masked ICE agents coming up to her and arresting her. When I posted it on my stories, a lot of people, I have followers from Iran. A lot of followers from Iran were like, "Oh my God, that's the kind of stuff that happens in Iran." I was like,
Mm.
"Yeah, exactly. That's what's happening here now."
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
Well, if you want to arrest someone, it's fine, but you have to follow the protocol. You can't do plain clothes with a mask. I mean, people thought she was being kidnapped on the street.
That, and
So,
also, the government doesn't necessarily have uh, damning evidence. I mean, also there's due process, right? You're supposed to take them in front of the judge. I mean, I was just reading a whole article yesterday about how they took these guys all from East Coast cities and flew them right down to Louisiana. So you're putting these people in bad situations, and in the hopes that at some point they just give up and they go, you know what, just deport me to my country. I don't want to deal
right,
with this.
right.
You'd
It's
send
not
them to
humane.
Louisiana. Yeah, it's very inhumane. You send them to Louisiana so that there's more conservative judges down there, so you might end up with a conservative judge. There's a lot of strategies that they're using that is just very much authoritarian,
Hmm.
and it feels like in the world of immigration they almost have carte blanche to do whatever they want. So it's
Absolutely.
scary. It's scary, and a lot of people, a lot of Iranians who support the administration, they're like, well, I came legally and all that. I go, listen, a
Hmm.
lot of these people, first of all, asylum seekers are legal.
Yes.
Secondly, I go, when they go after somebody who's got a green card and they're saying
Hmm.
that he's a Hamas supporter, well, let's show the proof. Like, what was he doing? Like, was it just a protest, or was he,
Right.
I don't know,
Right.
funneling money to them? I don't know what he was doing. So it's like due
Hmm.
process. And then thirdly, if they're going after people that have green cards, what's next? Like, they've been talking about trying to take away birthright citizenship. And also, I'm a naturalized citizen. What about them going like, you know what? We're going back
Hmm.
and we're going to revoke that. I mean, I don't know. So these same people who are
Right.
supporting this stuff, or at least condoning it,
Right.
could become fall victims to it.
Absolutely. And it's funny because a lot of I've had people DM me like Trump supporters or whatever conservatives saying like, your immigrants are taking our jobs. First of all, as far as Persians go, honey, we're not taking your jobs. We're in a totally different tax bracket than you. Every Persian I know is in a totally different tax bracket than you. We are not taking your jobs unless you're a doctor or a lawyer or a businessman. So just I think that is like where I find the humor in it is like in what work, like that's not how life works. Like no one's coming in and they're just like taking your jobs. Like it's such hysteria building, but that's where I find the humor. And I think the more Persian Middle Eastern comedians speak on this, it becomes people start seeing the ridiculousness in those statements. So I think that that's the power of comedy.
Yeah, it's an age-old political move. You blame the immigrants, you blame the LGBTQ community, you blame people
Mhm.
that are in the minority, because then
Sure.
you can continue to be in the majority. You're not reflecting upon yourself. And yeah, I mean, really, what's taking jobs is automation. That's what's taking jobs. And if we don't, change um, uh, our education and our training to be training towards jobs of the future, then you're just going to end up with people, like you said, who could just drive around, maybe deliver food. Even that's being taken by those little robots that go around town. So
Yeah.
yeah, immigrants aren't taking your jobs. It's just
Yeah.
relax. And by the way, a lot of these jobs we both know, like all these undocumented workers that they're deporting, like most Americans aren't going to go pick strawberries,
No.
at that, especially not at the price that they are picking at. So it's just an easy target, and people fall for it. People fall for it. It's unbelievable.
Mhm.
It really is. I mean, I feel like I'm living in the wild, wild west right now. And I'm just, I tell Amir all the time, I'm just going to stay black, pay my taxes, and shut up. I'm going to continue doing the same things I was doing because those things are constant. It's never going to change. Well, who knows? Because he's trying to blow up the IRS, which I don't disagree with. Fine, blow that up. But circling back, just to pivot for a minute and talk about something a little lighter. Going back to your role on Friday After Next as Molly. OMG, you were hilarious. You were so funny. How did you land that role? And what was it like working with Ice Cube and Mike Epps behind the scenes?
Well, first of all, let me just comment on blowing up the IRS. Getting rid of the IRS is a good thing. I don't think it is, simply because one of the functions of the reason they added IRS agents was so that they could go and find these billionaires and multimillionaires who are avoiding paying their taxes. So I'm like, hey, if I'm paying my taxes, those guys should be paying their taxes. But those guys have money to pay people to help them not pay their taxes. And so that's why there
Mhm.
was more IRS agents. The idea was that they would then bring in more money. But again, the rich don't want to pay their taxes, so now they're getting rid of that. So that's that. Friday was great. Friday was an amazing experience. Me and Cat Williams and Terry Crews were the new guys in Friday After Next, and we were just giddy as all hell out there, and it was so fun. And like, Cat's one of the funniest people you'll ever meet, and sweetest people you'll ever meet, and Terry as well. Ice Cube's a legend. Mike Epps, John Witherspoon. I mean, it was like left and right. You just keep looking around. You're like, oh my God, all these people I've seen, growing up, and here I am in a movie with them. And also, what was great about Ice Cube and the director Marcus Rayboy was that they would tell you, listen, the next take, Mike's just gonna go off, off script. So just, if you want, say whatever you want. So they were smart in having it scripted and then giving us a chance to then do our own thing. And I think Ice Cube is smart in casting comedians who can write, basically, in these parts, because he knows that they'll bring something extra to it. And so I think that from the script to what you saw on screen, there was an elevation because the performers got a chance to create as well. So it was one of my favorite experiences in a movie ever.
I love that. That movie is one of my favorites.
Hilarious.
I love hearing the inside scoop.
Mhm.
We had Tehran on this podcast, and we love him. He hosts your Maz Jobrani Live that you guys are touring currently. Can you give us some tea on Tehran, roast him, give us some behind the scenes? He is always making fun of me, so I feel like this gives me the chance to finally make fun of him. So I can send him this clip and be like, Maz is roasting you. Give
Well,
us something about
Tehran, I
Tehran.
mean, I got to start by saying Tehran is one of my favorite people. I feel like
He
he's my
is.
son.
He's
He's a
great.
gentleman. He's smart. The one issue he does have is he's got this sweet tooth that is just
Mm.
out of control. So when we first started touring, I'd be like, all right, so you want to get salmon? You want to get steak? What do you want to get? He's like, ooh, can we just go by McDonald's? I was like, what do you mean? Like, you're fit. Like, he goes, yeah, I eat fast food and junk food. It's like, really? And then he'd go to like CVS and come up with like Skittles and Twizzlers and this. I was like, what are you doing to your body? And he's younger, so he was like doing it. And then he's got me now. Like, he knows I like peanut M&Ms. So every time he gets some self candy, he comes back with peanut M&Ms for me. I'm like, you're like my drug dealer. Just give me peanut M&Ms. Of course, if they're around, I'm gonna eat them. I got my own issues. So yeah, Tehran. I told him, I said, as you get older, you're gonna want to start eating better. And I will take credit. He's now eating salads and he'll eat
Oh.
steaks and he's doing like,
Ooh.
so I've helped Tehran. I've helped his diet improve since we started touring together.
I love that. I
He's
love that.
amazing. He's so funny. And you know what? You kind of remind me of him because you're super intelligent. And it really takes a brilliant mind to come up with these jokes, be able to do the ad libs, be able to think on your feet effectively, because that's what the main thing. Like you said, you can be in an audience and totally bombing and have to pivot on your feet in that moment. Look at someone in the audience and say, hey, why is your shirt green? Are you sleeping with the woman next to you? Sometimes that can get you in a lot of trouble as well. But what advice would you give to young comedians trying to break into the industry without losing their cultural identity?
I mean, your cultural identity is what's going to inform your act. I think a lot of people lean into their cultural identity. Some people choose not to, which is great too. So it's people from different backgrounds that go, I don't want to talk about my background. I just want to do jokes or whatever. Great. So I don't think you're gonna. As a matter of fact, I think it's the opposite. I think when you get into a business like this, any creative field, you start to delve into your past, your culture, your experiences as you're mining for material. And so it's almost like therapy. You find out more and more about yourself. So
Hmm.
usually people that get into this type of stuff uh, get closer to their culture, I would say. So
Hmm.
I don't think that's a fear at all. And I just keep telling people, get on stage as much as you can, write as much as you can, and you'll see results in a few years.
Oh, I love that. I think, the simplicity of your advice is really good because I think sometimes people give advice and it's so complicated, but I think it's just getting up there and kind of working those comedy chops, I think is the way to go. So I love that.
Listen, a doctor does whatever 4 or 5 years of residency and 4 or 5 years of medical school. So it's
Mhm.
no different. Whatever you want to do, if you're going to be good at it, the first day you become a investment banker, you're not great at it. The first
Right.
day you start, you're a construction worker, you're not great at it. But eventually you get good. So you got to put in
Oh,
the
yeah.
time. There's no shortcuts.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The first person I interviewed, I offended them so many times they actually hung up on me. So
There
there
you
you
have it. There you go.
go. So you figure it out. I want to ask you something. It's a bit like kind of darker, but my limited experience with comedians and the stand up set. It's a lot of people deal with a lot of addiction and depression, and there's a lot of kind of dark stuff that you have to work through. Do you have you seen that, and how have you kind of not, because you have such a good head on your shoulders and you've navigated it so well, but I know addiction and depression really gets a lot of comedians, and there's also this kind of saying where to be funny you have to have gone through some dark stuff. So do you agree with that statement, and how have you kind of navigated staying away from the addictive sides of it?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, a couple things. First of all, comedians are constantly thinking about the human condition, because whatever you're analyzing and trying to do jokes about, that's what you're thinking about. So we have to think about issues that, like, if I were just an accountant, I might not have to. I might say, I don't want to talk about that stuff. But we have to talk about it. We got to go into our past. We got to go into our emotions. We got to find that. So that in itself, I think, exposes you, makes you vulnerable to certain emotional states.
Hmm.
Um, also, I think obviously the more experiences you have, the more rich your storytelling is. And a lot of, like, to your point, a lot of comedians have had, a lot of trauma and a lot of extreme experiences in their lives. And then when you go on stage and you tell those stories and the audience laughs, you realize, oh my God, people relate to this. Richard Pryor was trying to smoke crack cocaine and set himself on fire. And then in his next special, he did a whole bit about setting yourself on fire, and people were dying laughing. So you realize we all have issues, whatever
Hmm.
whatever profession you're in, you have those issues. And then of course with the addiction stuff, some of the addiction is genetics, and then also we're around alcohol and drugs and all, because our job is at the night. It's at a bar, basically. That's where your job
Hmm.
is. So it's easy to
Hmm.
fall into that. I personally have had family members who um, had big addiction issues. And so what I try to do as much as I can is, if I catch myself, let's say 3 nights in a row having drinks, first of all, my body kind of gets tired. It goes, I can't have any more drinks. And secondly, because I have experience in my family, I go, okay, I'm prone to that as well. So I better drink water for a few nights before I go back to
Got it.
drinking alcohol. So it's tricky. It's tricky to do because, like you said, you're in this environment, everyone's partying, you're having a good time, um, but you could go in the wrong direction pretty fast.
Absolutely, absolutely. I love that. I love that you're able to kind of have that self awareness. I think that really probably helps you a lot. We could talk to you forever. We don't want to. I know you're on tour. I don't want to keep you, but we just have some quick fire questions, and then we're going to wrap up. So, my first question is: in one sentence, how do you deal with like a heckler? Because I've had them, even though I'm not on your level. I've had hecklers, and it's kind of hard to diffuse them, especially if they become disruptive. So, how do you deal with them quite quickly?
I can't tell you in one sentence. Some people thought, oh, I should have a comeback. I should always have a comeback. But then I realized you should deal with them based on whatever your personality is. Some people go like, oh, you know what? You're saying that to me? I'll say, like, I'm going to assault you. But if you're not that person, it's hard for you to do that. So I've seen people be like, sir, just 2 more minutes. I'll be out of your life. You'll be out of my life. we can all move on. Just 2 minutes. Just give it, like, it's like you diffuse it that way. I saw one time somebody, Dave Attell was performing, somebody said something, and the audience was like, boo, shut up. And Attell was like, no, no, let's see what he has to say. And he goes, sir, go ahead, say what you have to say. And then the guy said something, and it was so inane, and it caused laughter. And Attell's like, well, maybe I should have listened to you guys. So really, it's like, just what's your voice and how do you deal with it? So I try as much as I can to just be like, dude, they're going to kick you out. I don't want you to leave. I know clearly you've had too much to drink. I'm not your enemy. I'm just trying to tell my jokes and you know what I'm saying? Like, I go that route, but it's your
Right.
personality. You got to go with your personality.
I love that. Comedian, living or dead, that you haven't met, that you would like to have dinner with, would like to, shoot the shit with, whatever.
Eddie Murphy, he was my hero. I'd love to meet Eddie
Mhm.
Murphy. I've almost
Mhm.
crossed paths with him a couple times, but I've never had a chance to actually sit with him. Like a dinner with Eddie Murphy, I'd be like, all right, I'm done.
Oh, nice. Well, let's manifest that for you. I like that.
Yes.
I like that a lot. Did you ever consider, this is our last question, did you ever consider a stage name, or you were like, no, I'm going to keep the name?
It's funny. I first of all, when I first started doing acting and stuff, I went to a commercial agent, and they were like, Maz Jobrani sounds a little ethnic. Might have trouble getting parts. And I was like, oh, this guy wants me to change my name. Like, what am I gonna be, like Mitch James or something? Like, I mean, like, and I was like, nah. I was like, by the way, nobody knows what Maz Jobrani is. So like, so I did not change my name then. But when I first started doing stand up at the Comedy Store, the way the Comedy Store works, it's called tag team. One comedian performs and brings up the next comedian, who then performs, brings up the next comedian, who then performs. There's no host. So every time you bring up the next person, you turn to the piano player and say, who's next? And they would say, whoever, Maz Jobrani. And oh, okay, great. So the first time I was there, this person who brought me up, um, she didn't know who I was. And so when the piano player goes, Maz Jobrani, they go, who? He goes, Maz Jobrani. I go, oh, okay. And then afterwards, they told me what they thought they heard was Monster Bunny. And they thought I was going to come up with a big Monster Bunny outfit. So I could have been Monster Bunny, but I didn't.
That's
That would have been
funny.
good as
Right.
well. That would have been funny. That's too funny. You've been fabulous. Thank you.
Thank you guys. Have a
Thank you
great
for
day.
being here. Thank you. And Amaz, we're just going to plug so you have your Maz Jobrani Live coming up. What are the cities and what's the website so people can go if they want to get tickets?
Yeah, people can follow me at Maz Jobrani all across the board. MazJobrani. I will be in Seattle, Portland, Sacramento, Austin, Dallas, Australia, Houston,
Amazing.
DC. I'm all over. So just go to mazjobrani.com, see if I'm in your city. Come out, have a laugh with me in Tehran. It'll be a good night. I guarantee it.
It's going to be amazing. And we'll put it in the show notes, and everyone go follow the Vault podcast page. And thanks again, Maz, for being here, and go follow Maz as well. Thanks, Monica. Bye, besties. Have a good day.
Bye, guys.